Record to the cloud. Okay, I think it thinks it's recording. Great. And do, if folks miss just a little bit and feel like they need caught up, feel free to let me know. And we can always step back a little bit. All right. So this is awesome. I'm seeing some very many colorful stickies, which makes me very happy. I went in and added a gold star to some brown noser who said they wanted to learn from me in particular. So excellent work there. Almost all of this is stuff that we're going to cover. I want to cover. I wanted to highlight a couple of things we might not get into as much here, and I wanted to tell you why. One of them is around, in this session in particular, specifically talking about good digital writing and writing for the web. Part of that is that content strategy is concerned with that, but that is really sort of like, that happens all the way at the end of the chain of like establishing content strategy in an organization. So yes, we care about good writing on the web, consistent standards and quality. The approach that I have around that is sort of creating the infrastructure and environment where that can happen, and less about teaching you all some of those web writing best practices. So we're not going to get into that as much in this one. I love all the stuff around like, what is content strategy? What do content strategists actually do? How does it relate to UX and some of those kinds of things? So cool, love it. I want to make sure that we are, by we, I mean that I am keeping on time here. So I am going to jump into this first one here around content strategy roles and responsibilities. That's not where I want to be. What is CS? So let's talk about it a little bit. Content strategy, that's not the one I want. Too many things. So if you ask 100 content strategists to define content strategy, probably 90 of them are going to give you one of these definitions that I'm about to share. But if you get them all talking about it at the bar after a couple of cocktails at a conference happy hour, you're going to find that people have very different understandings of what content strategy is and how it is practiced in their organizations. What I want to talk about a little bit are a few definitions. The takeaway, spoiler alert, is that these are all correct. The most important thing in practicing content strategy, building strategic understanding in your organization, is for you and the people that you are working with to be aligned on what content strategy is. That sounds like a cheat for someone who is supposed to be teaching you what content strategy is, but it's also the truth. Job number one, when I have gone in as a consulting content strategist to try and prop it up in an organization, is getting alignment on terminology and what these things mean. So I'm going to share a few definitions, ideas, frameworks, ways of thinking about content strategy so that you can enter into those kinds of conversations a little more confidently. This is definition numero uno. You'll probably see variations of this in a few places. Going back to this famous list apart article, that's a link, you can click it, on what content strategy is from one of my old bosses, Christina Halverson, former bosses, she's not old. Content strategy guides the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable content. Content strategy guides, that's a word I like to emphasize for people. So it doesn't necessarily do all of these things, but it, as I talked about infrastructure, it guides teams, organizations, people, content creators, depending on your group, might even be third parties, community content, whatever your plan is, it guides the creation of those things. There's actually an older form of this definition I like a little better, which is content strategy is a planning practice that guides the creation of these things. So that's one definition. Creation, making content, probably pretty straightforward. Delivery, how we get it out to people. Governance, if you're not familiar, is a term of art that people generally mean, used to mean digital governance. So decision-making frameworks about content. One of the most important questions in any content strategy, I find, is who gets to say no. It's very easy for someone to say, sure, you can add a page for that, you can add a module for that, you can put 5 more entries into the FAQ. Where the rubber hits the road is in that governance question is who gets to say, you know what, no, actually, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put a carousel on the homepage. We're not going to send this email out to all of these audiences. So content strategy, as practiced by a lot of folks, helps us make decisions about those digital governance questions. More definitions. This is a metaphor from Rachel Levinger, another article there you can open and read at your leisure later. Content strategy is to copywriting, so traditional copywriting, as information architecture is to design. Another way of looking at it. Information architecture, we'll talk about later if you're not familiar, is sort of the design of information spaces. So it's the art of thinking about the arrangement of the whole, right? How a whole website operates, the taxonomy of how things are labeled, how those ideas relate to each other, so on and so forth. Another one from a List Apart article here, from Jeffrey McIntyre. This is a lengthy one, so I'll give you a second to read it. Get my head out of the way. So content strategy addresses the specific purpose, form, and development of the content assets, the stuff that we have at hand, or how those things or would be required to produce. So this one's kind of getting at what content strategists do, which is we're really concerned about how this stuff gets made. If we don't have it yet and we need it, how's it going to get made? All the stuff that got made, the analysis part, do we actually still need it? We're really concerned with not just creating it, but really everything around the creation and then management of content. I like this one, my friend Margot Bloomstein from Content Strategy at Work. Content strategy is making smart choices. So again, planning, decision-making, infrastructure to ensure that the types of content we have, the tone of voice we use when writing it, the video and media and images and experience do so in a way that's appropriate for the brand and useful to the audience. I like that one a lot too, especially I think Content Strategy at Work came out 2012 maybe, so it's been out there a while now. But with the rise of UX writing, thinking about content design as a design discipline, I think that this definition is maybe more relevant than ever, of thinking about how we do all of this stuff, not just to meet user needs, but to do it in a way that is appropriate to our brand. So if we're going to be producing content, how do we have it elevate or at least not denigrate our brand and kind of mesh well with it? The 4 influences on content strategy. This is from the Elements of Content Strategy, which is a full-on book that you can fully read online in a beautiful, responsive layout. The Elements of Content Strategy. Erin Kassane has kind of an editorial journalism background. It's what she's focused on now. And I really like the way that she lays out sort of like, where do content strategists come from? Like, how did people get to be doing this kind of work? And so she talks about the disciplines that have influenced what we talk about as content strategy. Primarily those are, according to Erin, editorial, so kind of journalism, but if you also think like developmental editing, book editing, anyone who's sort of establishing storylines, and also the tone of voice and like shaping how, say, a publication sounds, right? If you read the New Yorker versus the New York Times, you've got different voices there, even amongst, there's some kind of consistency even when different authors are in there using their own voice. Curatorial. So again, like you could kind of think from publications, you could also think museum arts, the way that people, sort of organize information in a way that adds meaning to that information. Marketing, and I added rhetoric to that one. I think she used the word persuasion. So just what it sounds like, right? People from marketing backgrounds, how we use information to influence people, move them along in an experience. And information science, so kind of the library arts, how there's a lot of stuff in, especially in larger enterprises, where we talk about, we might be talking about metadata, like all the stuff that's not content that people actually consume, but is like super critical to the shape of content, the experience of content online. I'm curious, I wanted to pause here, maybe invite a little conversation. Are there other jobs, other influences? What else occurs to people as they think about disciplines that influence content strategy, or maybe even things from your own background that you have found helpful in navigating this space? And feel free to just unmute yourselves and pipe in.
I guess marketing is part of it, but I always think audience.
Sure. So the audience itself being an influence on the content strategy?
Yes.
Great. Okay. I love it. Talk about audience centricity, centeredness, one of those words all the time. What else? Localization and globalization. Love it. Yeah. Increasingly important. I'm finding a little later in my career, maybe it's just that everyone in the States got tired of me, but I'm getting invited to more and more international events where folks, it's not a nice to have things in multiple languages. So yeah, that's really, really critical. Other influences. Check the chat here. Yeah, so I'm going to extract kind of the discipline here. Brenna suggested product roadmap. So I would say just the whole discipline of product design, which is really not quite the same as UX design. I've had very different experiences in product-driven companies versus what you might think of as design-driven companies. Oh, psychology, that's great. Yeah, so classic for UX, influence on user experience design, but certainly important for content strategy as well. Psychology and cognitive science. Cog-sci, psychology, a lot of that stuff too helps. Anthropology, any of those kind of backgrounds with research can be really important as well. Yeah, personally, it's funny, Sam, 10, 15 years ago when I started doing some of this stuff, I don't know that I would have described personalization as a discipline that could influence it, but there's a whole culture around that now, and a lot to learn there. Personal, I can type it, personalization. Cool, great suggestions. And there's probably more. If this is helpful to anyone to hear, I have yet to meet a content strategist. I've yet to meet two content strategists that have the same background. There's all kinds of things you can bring to bear on this work. What I really like about this book, and I definitely recommend reading it, especially because it's free and it's excellent, is that it's very encouraging to feel like what you have to bring will be valuable. It's also great if you're thinking about building a content team to understand that there are different disciplines that people can bring to the table. Myself, I'm not much of an editor. You don't want me to copy edit things. I see job listings all the time about how the name of the book is The Elements of Content Strategy. I see job listings all the time about, how the person they're looking for is, persnickety about grammar and, an errant semicolon never misses their intention. That's not me, sorry. I could give two hoots about a lot of that stuff. I'm a systems person. The details elude me. You probably all have spotted typos and bad grammar in this presentation already. And I've been very successful in this work. So that's all to say, you can have a lot of different backgrounds that influence content strategy. Okay, getting into my territory here. This is the way that I describe content strategy to general audiences. It's all of those definitions that we went through earlier, I think tend to focus on, they're a little narrow for my tastes. I think it is more useful to understand that content strategy really in practice is 3 different things. We mean 3 things when we talk about content strategy. I was holding up 3 and you couldn't see me. 3 things. Content strategy is a discipline, it's a plan, and content strategist is a role. And I'm going to talk about each of those here. So when I say discipline, I mean that it is a thing like user experience design, like graphic design, like information architecture, like plumbing. It's a skill set. It's a set of tools, common tools. There are conferences to attend, courses you can take, communities to learn from, books to read, and common ideas. This is the most consistent meaning. Content strategy, I think, ideally, and what I advocate for is it's a big tent. I would argue it is inclusive of content design. It is inclusive of UX writing and information architecture and some of these ideas. Doesn't mean that they don't have their own disciplines and philosophies, but the discipline of content strategy is welcoming to those things. You can get as much out of a content marketing conference as you can from content strategy, as you can from information architecture, and bring all that stuff into your work. So a lot of times when people talk about what is content strategy, it's just this. Content strategy in some organizations is a monthly lunch and learn, and people who care about content talking to each other. And that is a great start. That's a great way to understand content strategy. That's not everything, but it's part of it for sure. And there's, a whole alphabet soup of things. Contrast there is a little bad, I apologize. But there within the discipline, there's sub-disciplines and specializations. Accessibility is a big topic in content strategy, interface writing, intelligent content, structured content, editorial strategy, all this stuff. You could teach a 1-day or 2-day course on almost any one of these topics. So content strategy as a discipline is just people who care about and are interested in this stuff and have some common ground in discussing it. At most organizations, when people talk about content strategy, this is what they mean. Content strategy is a plan. It's that decision-making framework, or at least the framework to make the frameworks of how we're going to make decisions for all the content stuff in our universe. That can mean editorial calendars, providing training, describing requirements for a content management system, auditing plans, all kinds of stuff that is that comprises the act of making decisions about your content. So a lot of times the content strategy is a thing. A lot of content strategy is documentation. We content strategists kind of get teased by other disciplines for making a lot of dead documents. We do a lot of diagrams and charts and plans and spreadsheets. Somebody's got to do that stuff. It's not all thrilling. I would not just say that I'm like excited Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 doing my job. I like it. It's not thrilling. There's a lot of just kind of operational foundational stuff in being a content strategist. So content strategy is a plan. That's another way of understanding it. And then where people end up doing a lot of the arguing on Twitter anyway, is around what the role of a content strategist is. And the reason I articulate the difference between the discipline, the plan, and the role is that you can have.
Hello. Ooh,
you don't necessarily have all of these things. Oh, yes. Hello.
Hi. Let me get Patty on the line here just a sec. 1 second. I know how to do this. I thought I knew how to do this. Oh, man. You're still there, right? Okay.
I am, yeah. What's happening now?
It sounds like Larry Asher of SVC.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't have my Zoom window front and center.
I guess I don't know how to do this. I think 206-499-4662. Thank you.
Larry, are we trying to add somebody to the meeting, or what's going on here?
Maybe send him a chat, Scott.
There we go.
Yeah, he might not know he's on.
Yeah, sounds like doesn't hear us.
Okay. Who knows? All right, I have him muted, so just keeping things lively here. Okay, back to pin my video. Am I still spotlighted? Are we looking at my slides? Great. All right. So the role of content strategist, discipline plan role. So you could be in content marketing, you could be a UX designer, you could be a developer, and you could learn from the discipline of content strategy. Doesn't mean you have to change your job, doesn't mean you have to take one of these courses. There's stuff to learn from, just in the way that I learned tons from the field of UX design, but I'm not, practically speaking, most days a UX designer. So there's a discipline. There is a plan. Most organizations don't articulate the plan. That's why there's so much bad content online, and why content is a derailer for so many projects, because we don't articulate that plan. Now, you could learn from the discipline, you could build the plan. You don't necessarily have to have content strategists to do any of this work. I worked as a consulting content strategist for an agency, would go in, help teams of content writers, support specialists, knowledge managers, whatever it might be. It could even be for internal content, prop up a content strategy and operationalize it. But that doesn't mean that they suddenly have to go and hire a bunch of content strategists. So it can be a job, but I like to talk about it more as a role, as the facilitator of that plan. I mean, I'll talk more even just later this session on what that role is really like. But there's, the kind of workaday stuff. There's writing, making style guides, putting guidelines into the CMS, tagging and categorizing content, maybe doing research, certainly interviewing people, some of that kind of thing. And at more advanced levels, a lot of content strategy is facilitation and kind of people leadership. So you might be putting a business case together. You might be doing big workflow planning documents. You might be sitting alongside a design team and doing prototyping and wireframing. So there's lots of stuff that you might find yourself doing as a content strategist. Do all of those things belong to content strategy? No. Sometimes plumbers have to cut a piece of lumber, and that does not mean that suddenly now they are carpenters. We just use the tools that are available across these disciplines to get the work done. Okay. I don't know how much appetite we have here for talking about jobs, but I thought this would be interesting. Thinking about that role, you could be a content strategist just about anywhere. I can tell you in my own experience where content strategists are quite popular, a lot of clients that we had, big organizations. The bigger you are, the more stakeholders and constituents you have, the more complex your content world. So I've done a lot of work in finance, done a lot of work for healthcare, both health insurance, large hospital systems, laboratories, that kind of thing, associations and membership-based groups. So anyone that has like a large professional practice, certainly higher ed. There's a whole community of higher ed content strategy professionals, big companies, civics and government, a lot of folks on the municipal side of things are drawn to content design, which is kind of a sister practice to content strategy, which we'll talk about more. And nonprofits, too often, I think a reason there is that a lot of them don't have big design teams supporting all of their work. They have to do a lot of communication on their own. I would say probably the least commonplace, now I did list it on here, one of the least common places that I find true blue content strategy work is design agencies. My opinion is that most of them don't get it. And they therefore don't hire content strategists. If you don't get it, it's hard to sell to clients. Sometimes they make the mistake of trying to sell it instead of just doing it. You need content strategy to make digital projects work. Most folks stumble through. So unfortunately, you're not going to find a lot. Yeah, they need it. You're not going to find a lot of job listings at a lot of design agencies or marketing agencies, unfortunately. Questions around these? I'd be happy to pause for a moment, have a little discussion. Where are you seeing content strategy? Are you curious about how it might work in certain types of organizations? What's missing from this list? Is anyone doing content strategy at one of these kinds of companies? Few hands, yes, great. Okay. Becky, if you care to share, I'd love to hear about what content strategy is like for you at a design agency.
Sure, I'd be happy to share. My title is technically UX designer, but I've been staffed on a lot of content-oriented projects, and I also think that I'm a bit of a heat-seeking missile for like content problems because my background is in journalism, so I think in a content-first way. But quite often for us, we don't have a dedicated content strategist on a project, so a UX designer will take over a lot of those tasks. Sometimes we're bridging the gap between sort of information architecture and brand strategy. Quite often the content strategy sort of sits in that groove. That's how we conceive of it. And I've worked on content strategy projects for a nonprofit, for a university, for the NFL's Player Association, actually. I did content strategy for their website. That was the first project of that kind I was staffed on. So it's very variable, but it's interesting that we don't have anybody at the agency who wears that hat on a sort of permanent basis. People rotate through, and it's usually UX designers and it's sometimes brand strategists who take on those tasks.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. That sounds very familiar from my own experience. And yeah, I find at any large enough gathering of content strategists, there's always some sort of interesting association or group like the NFL players one that you mentioned. And I think a reason for that too is like if I don't think it takes too much imagination to realize that a whole lot of entities, a whole lot of organizations like really just exist to facilitate the transfer of information between parties. Like it's communication all the way down, and it's organizing information, getting that information in front of the right people at the right time. That's another CS definition that's floating out there: the right content, the right people at the right time. So yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah, heat-seeking missile for content issues. Anyone else want to talk about maybe their experience or share with the group kind of what it's like for them to be doing content, filling that role of content strategist?
I work for Ameriprise, and I think in that company, and like all finance companies, it's ever changing. I mean, ever changing, ever evolving. So we never lack for work to do, and try to utilize, all of us, the same measures for writing the content so that it's user friendly. A lot of our content is directly aimed at financial advisors as well as phone associates for when either clients or advisors call. There's always technology changes. We're upgrading systems all the time. That content has to be constantly managed. We have to go looking for and seeking out those articles and documents that need to be updated. And, it does prove to be quite challenging at times. I mean, sometimes you forget how much there really is out there. We have over 10,000 documents, articles in our repository alone that we manage. And it's just like a group of 12 of us. And Ruchi's part of that group. And yeah, I guess that's why over 7-8 years, I've never grown tired of the position, simply because every day it's something different. You know, there's always projects that we're on. It's something, and you got to realize that you're doing this for the audience, you know, that's utilizing these documents. And so you really, you know, you got to look at it from their perspective and to make sure that everything's not only clear and concise, but in user-friendly terms. You know, we've gotten away, when we first started 8 years ago, we migrated over from an old system where everything was written kind of with technical jargon. And it wasn't really what I would call normal user-friendly jargon that we wrote with. And then we started adapting to utilizing our writing so that it actually sounds conversational almost to that point, so that when people read it, they get an immediate understanding of it.
Yeah,
that
I love
random?
it. That's I want to highlight two things you shared there that are really critical. One is that idea of it's never done, which some people love. It sounds like that's working for you. It drives other folks up the wall, and it is tough, especially when I'm coming in as a consultant, to kind of remind folks that like this, we are at this very start of our journey right now. There's going to be a lot more to do after we make these decisions, because these decisions beget these decisions beget these decisions, and it doesn't end. I also wanted to highlight how you talked about, you know, kind of new technologies coming online, things changing in the organization. There's so much overlap between especially at advanced levels, content strategy and change management. A lot of content strategy is change management. It's helping people understand this thing was this thing, and it's going to go away, and it's going to be replaced by this thing and by this thing. And if you're a legacy customer, you're going to have to use this thing, right? And that's, I mean, that is just, it's endless. It's just the organization's always changing, always growing. And very often, you know, successful organizations plan for that and plan the communication around that. A lot of folks don't. A lot of times in content strategy, you're going in, you're batting cleanup. There's just kind of junk everywhere. I mean, I go into Fortune 10 companies and we start poking around their content, and they have company picnic photos from 16 years ago that is like pulling huge traffic. It's wild. So
I think that's where Ameriprise really stands out. You know, they're so proactive on staying ahead of the game. And I so forgot to include Mayor Will up there. He's part of our group too, along with Ruchi. But yeah, Ameriprise, I can really say I'm proud of, because they are very proactive. I mean, we try to get communication, not only articles update and everything, but we have things called hot topics that we send out to all the teams that we create and write to let them know of the upcoming changes and things that are going to be implemented, or maybe things that are going away or things that are being replaced, or, you know, and they're very, very, very good about that, I have to say.
Love it. All right, let's see. We got a question here from Sam. Companies might fall into traditional enterprise space. Yeah, so that may be a term of art for me as a consultant. You know, I think of really just like anyone, really any like publicly traded company that did not become a publicly traded company by making an app. So that is finance. It could be insurance. It could be investing, banking. A lot of those kind of traditional, I mean, you know, it could be somebody who makes and sells widgets for automobiles. There's a lot of, you know, kind of for a lot of those organizations, this might be surprising to folks, but there are huge companies out there, huge. In 2021, they like really haven't gone digital yet, or they've just started to, or their digital presence is they send a newsletter. And they've never really thought about what digital at all could do for them. So that sometimes is another flavor of content strategy, is kind of helping people establish their first digital strategy of what they might do online. And to catch up on time here a little bit, I want to go to this one, which is talk about what content strategy is not, and that is content marketing. Content marketing is a tactic that a lot of companies use to generate organic traffic. So you make stuff and you hope that it will attract readers, right? Or downloads. It might be white papers, those kinds of things. The content marketing is like, instead of making ads or just, you know, yelling into the ether about our organization. We're going to try and make stuff, ostensibly valuable stuff, or at least interesting stuff that people will want to read. The reason that content strategy is not content marketing is that really marketing content, even if you have a big marketing program, the marketing footprint for most companies is just a sliver of all of the content that they have. Think about all of the help content, you know, that might be online, technical support content. There's just product content. You might just have descriptions of your product and what it does and how it works. There's all of the search results that is, you could think of as marketing content, but really is part of the user's journey if they are doing a search for some topic on your site and how they find that. So the reason I highlight this is that this is really a mistake that a lot of organizations make, which is that they prop up content marketing with this idea of we're going to generate a bunch of content to generate a bunch of traffic, but they haven't gone through this strategic planning process to know like why we're doing that in the first place, or what we're going to do with all this traffic once we have it. All right, little exercise to pull people in. I need your help here. I'm sure we have folks from both sides of the aisle, and maybe you haven't done content strategy in one of these environments, but certainly you know these groups. Agency/consulting world versus being in-house or enterprise. I want to talk a little bit. Oh, we have a giant sticky on the board here. What's happening? I can't move that one. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay. So proofing and editing critical content. Do you think that someone working in an agency role is doing that? Do you think someone in an in-house role, where's that more likely to happen?
In-house, personally.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think if you're working at an agency, you know, it could be that there's a few key pages that you're looking at to really set the tone or the standard. But more often than not, if you're a consultant or working in an agency, the clients, you're really more setting up the system that helps them manage that content. How about creating tools and templates for people doing content work?
I would go with agency myself, but
I'd
I
go
don't
with
know.
in-house.
What do people think?
We have
Maybe
it
both.
in-house.
We have it in-house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can be
do too.
both.
Yeah, I'm inclined to drop this one right in the middle. I think this is a pretty common shared activity. The in-house or enterprise folks might be doing more maintenance of those tools. I think something that you'll find a lot if you're trying to build a content strategy practice, there's probably already content planning work happening. There's project request forms and briefs and things like that. And a lot of times what a content strategist will do, especially in an in-house role, is just work with what's there and start to make it a little smarter and maybe help people ask questions in a better sequence. How about voice and tone guidelines, creating the voice and tone guidelines? And for any of these two, if I know we haven't covered all this stuff necessarily, so feel free to ask clarifying questions. Voice and tone guidelines, kind of an agency role, kind of an in-house role. What do people think?
In-house?
In-house.
Both. In-house.
I think it would be both.
Yeah, I think it's both too.
Cool.
It is
Okay.
both
it
if
kind of
the
falls under
agency does brand
consulting.
strategy.
Yeah, so that's, I don't know who that was, but that's a great point. I think, you know, I'm gonna like zip it a little over here.
Mhm.
I think practically speaking, that's doesn't always end up being something that as a consultant or an agency, you have a chance to have an impact on. A lot of times there already are brand guidelines that have been built. I inherited a lot of brand decks. Most of them, I mean, God bless people for trying, but a lot of them are fluff. There's just a lot of fluff in there about it. And so sometimes I kind of have to make like more practical, like writer's guidance based on someone else's brand guidelines. All right, I'll drop a few more in here. Interviewing users, agency, in-house, agency, in-house. This one's a trick. What do we think?
Should be both.
Both?
Yeah.
It should
I
be.
think
It should be both. It should be both. I'm dropping it closer to in-house because I don't know why, but people don't like to talk to their users. Sometimes they're so protective. especially if it's like the more influence that the CMO has, like the chief marketing officer, in my experience, the less likely they're going to let you talk to their actual customers, because Lord knows why. I don't know why. Content guidance and editing, I'm feeling in-house. I feel like that's kind of a coaching, consulting type of role. Content inventory is in-house. How about stakeholder interviews?
Could be both.
Both.
Yeah, both. But maybe more
Hopefully
on
it's
the
both.
agency side.
Yeah, it's definitely foundational for agency practice. Editorial calendars.
In-house.
In-house.
Drop that in the middle here. I've done quite a few. I think it's that's kind of low-hanging fruit as a consultant or an agency. Sometimes people just want a quick and rough plan for their content production. So I think you might find both. We'll drop CMS over here. That's usually an in-house role, and sometimes product taxonomy work. So sort of the language that you use is kind of in the middle here. There's not much that you would only do in a consulting capacity as a content strategist. A lot of times, will I be sharing any frameworks for editorial calendar creation? Maybe. We've got a toolbox section next week. So if that's something that's of interest to people, we can definitely do that. All right. Let's see, by let's, I mean me. Let's see where we're at on time in here. Okay, I think what I want to do is I'm going to zip through this about me stuff really quick, just in case it's helpful for anyone, and then we'll take a formal 10-minute break. How's that sound to folks? So a few more minutes, take a break, get back to it. All right. So it's me on me on me. So my own background, if you're just curious, I wanted to talk a little bit. This is not quite in order, but these are all links in case people are interested. I have two things that I do now. So I am a content strategy consultant, which practically speaking, most days means I'm doing this kind of stuff. So I'm teaching and training, putting learning materials together, talking to fine folks like you. Sometimes I do this kind of thing in-house. I find a lot of times the very first thing, the way to really start to open the door to content strategy in an organization is just to provide exactly this kind of experience, is to come in and talk to people about the discipline of content strategy, the kinds of questions that it can answer, and so on. Sometimes it's workshop facilitation, getting people aligned on strategy, those kinds of things. A few places I've worked in-house. There's a technology company in Illinois called Wolfram. If anyone kind of slacked their way through college math classes, as I did, you might have used Wolfram Alpha because it has a feature I worked on quite a bit called step-by-step solutions, where it actually, if the math teacher is saying, show your work, it shows you the work. But so I was a user interface writer in-house there. I've worked for an app startup that no one's ever heard of because it's defunct now. But back in the early days of the App Store, we built some breaking news apps and some things there. I did about 5 years of consulting for Brain Traffic, which is a content strategy consultancy, going into higher ed, healthcare, finance organizations, helping them set up strategy. And then now, in addition to doing this, I'm on a full-time contract at MailChimp, the email people. So that's an interesting one. I talked about how the roles and the titles aren't always the same thing. Interestingly, I think MailChimp was one of the last holdouts now where the job title is still content strategist. Practically speaking, hour by hour, I'm mostly working as what I would describe as a UX writer. So I'm sitting alongside a design team. And I'm really just part of that team, but I'm not drawing the boxes and arrows and adding the Figma components. I'm focused on the words. So that's a little bit of my background, my guidance, and I'm always happy, especially, this is very much an area where I'm happy to help people after the class as well. But I have an article here. This is the most common question I get is, how did I get started in content strategy? It wasn't from taking a course, it wasn't from getting certified, it wasn't from going to school for it. The advice I give to everyone is get as close to the content as you can, care the most about the content, keep caring. People will notice that you care, and invent your own job. That is how almost everyone doing this work now, especially people doing it at a very senior level, got the work. They found a team or a group or an organization who needed the help, and they started doing it. That is not an easy thing necessarily. I think it is an easier thing to do that, to just look at where you are, look at how communication happens in your organization, start looking for opportunities to help. I think that is easier than putting a content strategy portfolio together and finding a job at a place that already gets it. Most places don't get it, and most places are not hiring for this help because they don't know that they need it. So I intend for that to be inspiring and uplifting. I wish that what I could say is that there are just thousands of job listings for content strategists, and it's well understood, and that if you can show these 3 things in your professional background and resume, you'll be able to get those jobs. Very often not how it works. It's more all the backgrounds that you already have. People come in from support roles constantly. That's very common. Customer service and support is a common background. Technical writing, any of those kinds of things. Any questions from that little lightning round of my background or things that people are curious about that I could weigh in on? No? Cool. Okay. It is 17 after the hour. I'm not going to try to do time zone math because I'm sure we're all over the place here. So let's make it an even 30. When it is at the half-hour mark, we will resume this session. So feel free, you can stay in the Zoom and just turn your video off if you want. I'm going to go dark here for a minute. But at the half-hour mark, 1:30 for me, we will return. All right, see you all soon. All right. Imagine, because life is life, some folks might find they're needed a little longer for the break. So I'm actually going to start up and look at the couple of questions we have so far. Let's see. So first, Brenna asked before the break in the chat if I like UX writing better than content strategy. For me, I would say that I need to be able to do both. If I'm only ever writing interface copy for experiences, and that's kind of what I'm restricted to, is thinking about just the words in the interface, that is boring for me. That's too narrow. I like it. I like when we're really clear on a flow and an experience and what we're trying to accomplish and finding the best words for the job. But that is not stimulating enough for me to do 40 hours a week. I also think that most people will find that there's just not enough of that to be done 40 hours a week. Usually, I think that most folks in that kind of role their time's going to be split between that and something else. So if it's interface writing and then they're doing marketing content writing or something like that, I like when my time can be split between writing interface copy, but also looking at the bigger picture. So for a project I'm working on now, we are getting some prototypes ready to run through user testing. Some things that I've been doing practically as a UX writer is taking a light pass at the content, not a heavy lift, just cleaning it up, what the designer's already put in there so that it's more sensible for the user test. And I'm also helping to edit the script for the user testing session itself. But as we're going through it, I'm making a document that is starting to capture some of the vocabulary in use in this new space that our product is dealing with. So just capturing all the words and how we use them and looking at kind of the taxonomy and infrastructure of what we're talking about. So yeah, so I like doing both of them. How does so I know I want to do this one at least right now, since I know I invoked information architecture quite a bit already today. And the question is, how does information architecture tie into content strategy? Information architecture in most organizations is not a formal practice. Unfortunately, most people don't have an information architect. So again, this is one of those things where everyone understands it a little bit differently, and that can be confusing. Practically speaking, where information architects and content strategists come together tends to be at the structural level of websites. This comes up a little bit with apps, but in my experience, it's mostly websites. The information architect is usually looking at how do we structure the footprint of our organization on the web in a way that is sensible to users. Because when you don't have an information architect or don't go through that process, you end up with what a lot of companies have, and schools especially, which is called org chart navigation. I don't know if anyone's heard that joke before, but a lot of times the sections on the website reflect the org chart of the organization that makes the website. And users don't know or care about your org chart. So a lot of times what an information architect does is they choose a different model. So instead of org chart navigation, we're going to organize things thusly. And within that thusly, whatever it is that they decide of how we're going to organize things, content strategists would then, and this could be the same person, remember, but a content strategist is then going to say, okay, what content is necessitated by this structure? Do we need landing pages to help people navigate through this? Does this structure indicate certain descriptions or vocabulary items that we need to add to our writer's guide, because we're going to be talking about things a little bit differently? Am I going to need to do some training internally to help people understand which content belongs to them because it doesn't reflect the name of their team, but it is for their constituents? So those are some places that information architecture and content strategy can fit together. There's a lot more of them, but hopefully that's helpful for a start. Okay, hopefully most folks are back. We can deal with some of these other questions as we go through the session. Thank you, everyone who's been adding them. This is fun. I want to talk now. First, I'm taking a sip of my tea, and I want to talk about this section in the syllabus is foundations of strategy. Oops, let's see. Go back to the very start of this one. So, foundations of strategy. The ultimate foundation, and the reason this slide is where it is in the presentation, of content strategy is business strategy, is understanding what your organization is trying to do. There's something that in my last year of Brain Traffic, Christina started talking about and writing about more, which is this idea of functional business goals. What I find is that brand people, no shade, no lemonade, but this is what brand and marketing people do. They go into an organization and they talk a lot about like vision and sometimes mission and all this like really aspirational stuff. Like, what's the change you want to see in the world, so on and so forth. Those things are important. What content strategists need more of, though, what we want to understand are just your actual literal practical functional business goals. Like, we are trying to get more of our customers to use self-service support instead of calling our call center because it's very expensive to do those call center calls. That's a very functional business goal. And that is a place where content strategists can come in and say, well, what is preventing people from using the self-service options? We've invested a lot in them already. Why aren't they using them? Maybe it's a navigation problem with the website. Maybe it's an accessibility problem where these things look like junk on mobile, but people are trying to look it up on their phones. There could be a lot of reasons that that's the case. Those kinds of functional business goals are where it comes together. When I'm talking about goal setting as a content strategist, a couple of things that I'm often highlighting for clients and organizations is that these goals are not going to be exciting. It's not about becoming the best, the leading, the preeminent, whatever. That's a lot of business hogwash. I like simple, straightforward goals. And we're going to look at a framework here in a moment for specifically how to do that. But a lot of content strategy goals are just very boring. Sometimes a content strategy statement is just like, we are going to keep the information that our users need up to date and well organized on our website. That's our mission as an organization, because we want this website to be a self-support tool for our customers, and it needs to work really well. That's not like we're going to bring in 10,000 new lines of business with this exciting brand storytelling video campaign on our site. That's not typically where content strategists tend to play. The other thing that content strategy gets into a lot, especially when content marketing is in the mix of the conversation, is knowing that we want to have smart goals and smart metrics around how we're making an impact. Not all web traffic is good. Sometimes a high bounce rate, meaning that someone hits a page and then leaves. There are pages where a 99% bounce rate is what you want, because that means someone found the answer and got it and then left. And that can be a win in your content strategy. It's often not a win in content marketing playbooks, because they are looking at things like engagement and conversions and all that kind of stuff. So content goals and business goals come together around these functional business goals. Something I talk about a lot too in my practice is mirroring. I'll show some examples of that in a bit. But when I talk about mirroring, it is sort of like, this is how I approach goal setting at a high level with an organization, which is just getting them to talk about what their goals are, what they're trying to accomplish, right? So taking that call center example, we want our self-service online support option. We want more people to use that and fewer people to call. Great. I put that on one side of the canvas. On the other side, I start to just list things that can make an impact on that from a content perspective, and thinking about what the user needs and what would get them there. Because the user doesn't, no one wants to talk to support at all unless they're very bored and lonely. You don't want to use self-service support. You don't want to use the chatbot. You don't want to call. You want your problem to be solved. So looking at it in that way of what's the content goal, what's the business goal, what's the user goal, is a very common pattern. So here is an example. And I started to use this tool icon in the deck so you can know some very specific, have a sense of when I'm highlighting a tool. Specifically, not just an idea. A couple of articles are linked here. My friend Megan Casey wrote an excellent book. It is blue. It looks like this. Where is it? The Content Strategy Toolkit. And that's where this is from, which is connecting content objectives to a business KPI. So KPIs, if you're not familiar, is a key performance indicator. Is that right? Key performance indicator. It's basically just it's a specific tangible goal, and how we know if it's working or not. Your product manager loves them. Business people like to talk about their KPIs, and that's great. So a KPI for your business, if you're an association, could be member acquisition. And this is just an example use case for a membership organization from Megan's book. Your content objectives there might be If we're going to acquire members, what do we need our content to do to make that happen? Well, we have to demonstrate value, let people know that it's a good idea to join the association, and describe the benefits of becoming an association member. That seems obvious. It's good to document. A lot of content strategy is writing down obvious things, because if we don't agree that we're trying to do this obvious thing, that it's an objective to describe the benefits of becoming an association member, someone might have a different idea of what the strategy is. They might decide that instead of describing the benefits of being a member, what we're going to do is focus on our high profile members and tell their stories. And we're going to make people really excited about our industry by sharing these stories. And then through magic and osmosis, that will make people want to become a member. So it's helpful to actually write down what you want to accomplish. And then under that, you can just list some actual goals. So is it a quantitative, meaning numbers, or qualitative, which means, you know, kind of anecdotal or descriptive assessment? How are we tracking it and how often are we looking at it? So if we're trying to acquire more members, some ideas here. We might look at the top paths to the sign up page. We might do a heuristic assessment, which just means based on best practices or set of principles. We might annually look at the key messages that we're putting out there, like sort of collectively, what are the messages that are going out in our publication? Do we think they're doing a good job of describing the benefits of being an association member? So the main thing here around these goals, this is not super exciting stuff, but it's super important stuff. You will, if you could get a team through an exercise to decide on some of these things of what do we need to do for the business with content? Well, we want to drive membership acquisition. We want to drive new memberships. How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to do it in these ways. How will we know that we're doing it? We're going to measure it in these ways. If you can get a team there, they will hug you at the end of the workshop. There might be tears. This stuff seems obvious, but a lot of organizations just don't take the time to sit down and write this stuff down. And it can be super valuable. So these sorts of KPIs and goal setting, there's a lot of other frameworks for it. This is just one. There's a couple of articles here that I've linked to that folks can look into. But that's super critical work and ends up being really valuable. Any questions on this before we move to some other frameworks?
Maybe a question about scale. In our organization being large, it's maybe like 2 levels up, you know, the organizational structure that's telling the story of content and KPIs. How do we as just participants also tell the story or get the story across?
Yeah, a word I end up using a lot, maybe not as purposefully as I could, but something I talk about a lot in content strategy is laddering. And eventually all of this stuff should connect. And what you'll need to find is like, ostensibly your team has been told to do something, right? And that something connects to, you know, that something may not be this, right? It may not be this larger business KPI, but if we even taking content out of it, that something is part of someone's plan to make that KPI happen, or to make that activity or that goal accomplishable for the organization. And so this, I got to be honest, this is so easy for me to say and so incredibly difficult to do in practice. The thing that is easy for me to say is what you need to do is ask your leaders, what are the functional business goals that we're supporting? Like where's the list of them? And then how does this work or area of activity connect to that goal? A lot of teams don't have that very well articulated. A lot of managers who have been using the Michael Scott somehow I manage philosophy to lead their teams don't like those kinds of questions because they realize they don't have good answers to them. Something that I will sometimes do, and this is this comes up in every workshop I've ever done, is I like, here, I'll do a little diagram over here. I like to draw a picture of where the gap is, right? So maybe we just use your specific example, Will. So like what would you like, you know, if you had to fill in for your team, like what is sort of the member acquisition API, like, or KPI, like, or is there something akin to that in your world?
Oh, I don't know. What do you think, Rex Rucci? Help me out.
I mean, there's some, you know, one way to think about this is I always just sort of say, like, what does it say on the tin? Like, is our job to like support these people? Is it to help this? Is it to publish that? Like, what's,
Well, I
you know,
think-
we're just kind of like at a high level. What are you doing?
Well,
I think KPI comes
phone
into
agents
play for
get the
us.
right answer the first time.
I got some overlapping talk there. Can you hit me with that again?
Phone
ahead, Will.
agents the right answer the first time.
Okay. Yep. So help agents get to the right answer the first time. So this is what we're doing with our content.
And we're
There's
actually, oops. And I was gonna say, we actually put into place now that we just started doing what we call journey mapping, where we set up like scenarios to where one of us pretends like they're a financial advisor, and then two of us are like clients that call in and say, you know, I've got a trust account and the trustee just died. How do I get the proceeds to a beneficiary? And then we watch that agent that's actually part of our team try to find and navigate that answer to see how long it takes them to get. And then that way we know how to better, I guess, formulate and better put in better search words and key terms and things so that that article will come up more quickly than, you know, like we've been finding out, like sometimes it takes over an hour for somebody to actually locate that information. And then we actually put it to test with actual financial advisors as well.
great. Yeah. So, I mean, that to me seems right on par with this kind of model, right? So, you know, I think in the scenario that you've outlined, and I do have some experience with the Ameriprise team there, like, you know, the difference is really around these metrics. You know, I think a business KPI for your team is just like reduced time on phone for advisors potentially, right? Something like that. And you can just describe like all the ways that we're doing that. And what we're going to do with the content is make it easy to find. We're going to structure it well so that it does X, Y, and Z. You know, and then a lot of times, like, you know, the higher level work of content strategy sometimes is going up and up and up a few more levels to explain why that matters to the business. Which isn't always your job as a content specialist or someone working as a content designer, but someone on the team, that's their job. And as long, you know, the more shared understanding there is around that, the more the smarter planning you can do.
And we do monthly audits, like and pull stats for Rue. Sorry about that. We do monthly audits as far as like how often articles are viewed on a monthly basis. And the ones that fall into the lower demographics, we actually reach out to the few people that are utilizing them, asking them, why do you utilize this? Do you find it helpful? Would it be better combined with maybe another article, other than just being like on its own? So, you know, again, we try to streamline and get rid of, you know, excess waste, basically, if it's not being utilized correctly, or if it could be utilized better.
Yeah, great. I love it. I mean, that all makes sense to me. I think you know, the things to be done with that kind of work really is just making sure that it's articulated in some sort of framework like this, so that you can, you know, tell that story about how the content itself is part of that part of that impact. You know, if things are getting better for people, sometimes, you know, like a lot of the work that I do as a content strategist, quite frankly, I don't work with numbers a lot. I do a lot more case studies and telling stories about, like, here by way of example is an article that we improved, and here's how you can understand the impact that it had all the way up the chain in the business. Yeah. Okay. I want to keep us on time here. A couple of questions in the chat. Let's see. Claudia is asking about brand strategy and content strategy. Do I have a good place to talk about that? Oh, I'll talk about that when we get into the frameworks here in a minute. So do remind me around brand strategy. Leadership and stakeholder management come into play. We will talk about stakeholders in a moment. That's a great one. And Diana, that may have been related to a conversation we were having. Which gap are you talking about?
You started showing in the last slide how you find a problem and then create the gap, and you were going to draw it on the whiteboard, but then we started talking about other things. And so I was just wondering if do you do like a Venn diagram, or is that what?
Sure. So the thing that I will do a lot, do I have a good slide to move to for this? Dun, dun, dun. Well, so here's a different way of thinking about it. This is going to be kind of messy, but it will get my point across. So let's say that what I want is this, like I want this done and all filled out, so that we have some direction around how our content team is going to impact this KPI and measure it. That's going to give everyone direction. We're going to feel like we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. Excuse me. What I have done in the past, and I see a lot of folks do, the wrong way to do it is to just keep asking for this, to ask for that direction and say, what we need are content objectives. Why won't anyone give us content objectives? Instead, what I do is any of these tools that I'm referencing, I make the template. This is stuck being square. Where's a shape? Dun, dun, dun. So a thing I do all the time is actually take any of these templates, any of these tools, and show where we don't have answers. So I will, rather than saying, I wish someone would give us the content objectives, I'll show stakeholders that I'm trying to get clarity from a framework like this, any one of these tools, show them where we don't have answers. So like having an empty strategy statement that lists like priority audience and then a blank, and most important topics and then a blank. And someone asked about editorial calendars earlier, showing them a blank editorial calendar of like what our 3 storylines are going to be for 2022 is a 1000% more productive conversation than just conversation of talking to someone of like, boy, it'd be really nice if we knew what we're going to do editorially for 2022. This is not a complicated point I'm making. It is maybe the most important point I can make about content strategy and doing this kind of work. Draw pictures of holes, show people the thing where you don't have an answer. Don't just talk about it, don't complain about it, show them where the gap is. If you demonstrate that gap, right? Or maybe you had both of these. You have the KPI and your content objectives, but what we don't have are any metrics around it, right? So then you put this together and you show like, okay, what I want to do in this conversation is talk about what metrics we might use to measure the content impact on membership acquisition. Who has ideas? You brainstorm a bunch of those. You have conversations, you interview stakeholders, you talk to your statistics and analytics team and see which ones are easier or harder to get. And then you put a plan together. So thank you for the question, Dana. That's what I was talking about when I say like demonstrating the gap. If you're absent a larger functional business goal, excuse me, the scary and awful thing situation to be in is when this one's missing, right? And sometimes it's not just missing because no one's told us, it's missing because, I don't know, this company was founded in 1904 and we have 50,000 employees and everybody shows up to work every day. So something's working, but no one's really told us what we're all doing here exactly. That's a tough thing. That's a tough thing. So I don't envy you in that situation, but it is demonstrating this gap can be really important.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. You know, something I learned this from Christina, how I learned a lot from Christina Halvorsen, but one particular thing I love that I learned from her is that when we would coming in as an agency, as a consultant, what we would have to do sometimes is like to the point of almost literally drawing red flags. Like we would kind of put together a proto content strategy and say, this part of the strategy is based on assumptions that you gave us about audience, or we made this absent research with actual users because you wouldn't let us talk to the users or you didn't have the budget for it. So there's a gap here and you need to know that. And your first job is to fill that gap, right? So sometimes we're giving the client the gap of like, here's every question we were able to answer during this engagement and here's what you need to answer next. Cool. Thank you for the question. That helped bring a little clarity to what I even wanted to share in this section. Okay, so I want to talk about strategic alignment a little bit. I want to get to the question around brand and content strategy, where these things come together. Creating strategic alignment sounds like a big fancy thing. It's a lot of the bread and butter work of content strategy. You'll hear people talk about creating alignment, aligning. All this really means is like getting people to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. That's not an easy thing to do, but it doesn't have to be a complicated thing. And most of the tools that content strategists use are made up. They're just documents and diagrams that capture conversations and our understanding. So I've done 50 variations on strategy statements, which is, you know, like where we're going to play and how we're going to win, that kind of thing, through our audiences. A lot of what we do in workshops. I'm going to get to some specific tools here in a moment. But something that I really like for getting people aligned is using a content strategy framework. And framework is an important word here. So the framework that you use is not your strategy. This is a very famous diagram in content strategy circles. This is the quad. It has 5 items. I don't know why it's called the quad. I guess because of the 4 corners. But this 5-item diagram called the quad, which I will now call the quint, describes the inputs to one's content strategy. So there's the content side, the people side. The idea here is that this is sort of a way of saying, when your strategy is built, when your content strategy is established, it should help you answer questions in each of these areas. So a complete content strategy is going to help your team answer questions in these areas. So substance, as I'm remembering this original version of the quad, is sort of like, what's our content about? Like, what are the actual topics? What's it made of? What are we writing? What are we saying? So our content strategy should help us answer those questions. What are we writing about? Your content strategy should help you with structure. How is our content organized? Are there content types that we use? I saw someone asked about content modeling, which we'll probably talk about next week. You know, are there repeatable formats that help people make sense of our content and make production easier? How is this stuff organized? On the people side, who's in charge of producing this? Who's responsible for editing it and reviewing it? Who takes down the company picnic photos a year later, so we don't have them going back 15 years from the CEO that's in jail now or whatever? Like all those governance questions. And then workflow, like in what order should we be doing this work? So what this framework does is it helps you have a conversation with your team about the questions that you need to answer. I use these frameworks as a jumping off point to say, what questions do we want to answer in each of these areas? If I'm scoping a content strategy engagement as a consultant, what will often happen is that the engagement will actually focus on one of these areas. I might be brought in for a 2-day workshop just to help with workflow, right? Which isn't because we don't have problems in these other areas, but it's where it hurts the most. And so we want to talk about how our teams collaborate to get a piece of content done on the website and distributed to our audiences. So I would then design an engagement around that. And importantly, and we're going to practice this in a little bit, I'm going to help our team, I'm going to help them just articulate the questions that they actually have, right? So all the stuff that's swimming around in their heads that makes this all feel so frictiony, I just start writing those questions down. And then we make a choice about how we're going to get to an answer. That is at its core what doing content strategy is. What are the questions around content? How are we going to get an answer? Write the answer down. These frameworks help you make sense of how you're going to have that conversation. So this is still called the quad. This is the new quad. It's a different lens for looking at this. What are our questions about experience design, editorial, structure, and process? So similar language, slightly more evolved model. You could also have a philosophy around content strategy. This is one from my pal, John Coleman, used to work at Facebook. Facebook famously moved fast and broke things, and now our democracy is buggered. But the content strategy folks there, and I think this is from their research labs, offered this alternative to move fast and break things, which is, the philosophy of the designers and engineers is like prototype, 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 get it out there, test it and learn. And they approached it with this idea of like, you know what, let's establish some foundations. Let's start to, write down what the problems are in our content world. This I could and have done a whole workshop on. I just thought I would throw it in the mix. This is my framework that I developed for talking about content strategy. I think this responds to Claudia's question about brand a little bit. So I think of this as a clarity framework. If an organization has clear vision and a clear voice, then things are working well at the organizational level. You could also, so there's the business and product side, there's the brand and content side. This is just sort of like where and how people tend to talk about things. Content people and brand people talk a lot about voice and message and tone, how we're communicating, what we're communicating, in what way, and to whom. Business people or product people are a lot more focused on the what we're doing, our vision as an organization, specific projects that we're undertaking, which I refer to as missions, and then the context. So like the targets being like who we're trying to reach and so on. Again, this is not a content strategy. There's not an answer. There's not a one sentence answer to each one of these. Rather, these are areas that a content strategist could help an organization get some clarity. What I'll find a lot is, and it's actually, I think it's kind of funny, a lot of times a company will have a voice because they hired a branding agency who gave them some voice characteristics, but they maybe don't have much of a vision. They couldn't really articulate what they want to be different in the world by virtue of existing. And I sometimes have to step into the role of visionary CEO coach to help someone articulate what the heck their company does. I've done that a lot for startup folks who, if they're being honest, their vision is to build a business. The mission or the vision for a lot of corporations is enrich our shareholders, which is not inspiring to writers. So there might be some articulation that has to happen there. So just another framework that you can use. And what I will do typically, and what I encourage you to do as you go out there and start to do this work, find a framework that you like. You might even borrow it from content design if you like one of their frameworks better, or Jesse James Garrett's principles of user experience design. Pick one of these kinds of things, one of these diagrams with 6 or 7 boxes on it that makes sense to you. And then with your team, figure out what questions you have in each of those areas. That's how you start to crack into content strategy. I'll talk a little bit more about stakeholders and how we kind of establish and get strategy out there. any questions, thoughts, things that folks would want to dig into right now as we've been talking about strategic alignment and strategy frameworks?
Scott, I had a question around matrix. Before you were speaking about how, like the framework that you had up there, say for example, there are several bound states, right? So you can judge in the sense of whether there was number of signups, if people made purchases. So you can, like, in that matrix, you can judge whether that content was successful, whether you got what you needed. But say for example, in what we deal with, right? So there's two types of content that we deal with. One is field facing. So maybe the matrix would be the number of calls we got in that month or the quarter. So if that's high, that means our content is, there's some gaps in the content. But there's also a fee. But the other bit is internal, which is our processor just reading through the documents that they need to do their daily jobs. Maybe something has changed, maybe there's a new case string, or maybe there's a system upgrade and things like that that keep happening in the background. So if we have to measure that, how would I measure, or my team would measure, whether the content was, it got the job done? Like if, say, for example, there's a bounce rate on X article, which is being consumed by an internal consumer, just a processor who's trying to read and see whether the information is up to date or not. How would I or my team know whether this person got what he needed or not? Like it gets a little tricky to measure there.
I'm not sure if I'm totally tracking. I will try. I think the answer to your question is in your question, in the sense there is that, like, in putting together a matrix like this of, like, what are we going to measure? What are the metrics that we want to pay attention to? You could certainly add, and in conversation, if you were to extend this out another row, it's like, how will we validate this? Like, how do we know that this means that? That there's no automated way to do that. You have to have a conversation with your team. And so if there's a sense that, okay, someone has suggested that we measure the number of calls that get categorized this way. If you talk about it as a team and you realize that 40, 60, whatever percent of those calls might be false positives because really it was only driven by this technology change, then there's your answer. Like, that's not a good metric for you then. You need a different metric, or you need to exclude a quarter that the change happens. Or when you present about this, when you do your report at the end of the year, you flag that if it seems like it peaked up. The answer I wish I could give is, here is the perfect set of metrics to understand if any content is working well. It's a chart, grab it, install it in your organization, and now everyone will know when they should get bonuses and if they're doing a good job. I wish that was the case. It does not work like that. So you're asking, it's a fantastic question. And when you're doing this work, it's a question you ask your team and you solve that together.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions that people have around business goals? It's a whole big topic. That's the other challenging thing. I always feel so bad when I'm doing, like, intro to content strategy, because, like, my God, really what needs to happen is that everyone's managers and CEOs need to go to, like, a 2-week business strategy course, and they don't, because they're in charge and we can't make them. So we are all muddling through on the back end of interpreting, not super clear stuff. So yeah, I don't know about the new quad either, Becky. I kind of like the old one. I like mine personally, which Melissa Rock said was golden. I think I took a screenshot of her comment on SlideShare in, like, 2012, and it's at the beginning of little content strategy baby, and I was like, someone smart likes what I said. So, all right, any other questions on the frameworks? Going once, going twice.
How do you get a CMO on board? Like, ours basically says, I want a content strategy that's gonna, and I want to see how it's, creating new degree enrollments and moving the needle. But nobody ever takes those initial fundamental steps of kind of outlining the strategy or the plan. So how do you even get somebody like that on board with doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the easy thing to say and the hard thing to do is like, and we're gonna, this is a perfect segue, thank you, into identifying stakeholders and interviewing them. We need to learn what's important to that person that's not on board yet. And what I find, there's a very classic facilitation and design thinking tool of laddering, or the 5 whys. So if, wherever someone starts, it's like, well, what I want is a content marketing program that generates lots of organic traffic to our blog. Well, why do you want that? Well, we want a lot of organic traffic to our blog because right now, 1% of website visitors convert. And so therefore, if we can get twice as many website visitors, that's going to mean a 1% growth. Okay, well, why do we want 1% growth? Which, like, well, why wouldn't we want growth, right? Well, we want that 1% growth because if I can get 1% growth, then I'm going to get, I'm going to be able to make my case to grow the team. And then we're finally going to be able to hire someone to do this kind of work. Who knows, like you dig into that conversation enough and it may be fully unrelated to an actual content goal. So laddering is one way to dig into it. I'm sure folks I know there's a lot of experienced practitioners of all kinds of disciplines on this call. So you're probably familiar with that kind of approach. The other thing I would say is that a lot of times, what's a kind way to put it? There's sometimes there's a failure of imagination around what content strategy can really do. And I think that a lot of listening, a lot of sitting there and taking notes and just sort of like talking about like, what are your problems? What are your pain points? What do you wish was different? What's hard about this work? What's frustrating about your team? What do you spend a lot of time doing? CMOs, this is what's bonkers to me. I find that there are a lot of CMOs who are people with 20 years of career experience. They're wearing very expensive shoes and carrying very expensive bags. And they're in 60 hours of meetings a week. And then they're going home and editing the newsletter, which is bonkers to me. So like that person has pain points in their job. And I can pretty much guarantee you there is a way that content strategy can help with something. So a lot of times it's just a lot of listening and digging. The wrong way to go about it is, and I may have alluded to this earlier, but like I care about all this stuff that we're talking about in this session. I hope that you all care about some of it. Trying to convince other people that this stuff is interesting and matters doesn't work. That has not been my experience. So like showing them the quad necessarily, talking about like the value of content strategy, isn't always as effective as what I have right here, which is just doing those kinds of interviews. So that's a long-winded answer to say you got to listen to people and ask, but it is, in my experience, the primary mechanism. I don't know if that's helpful at all. Yeah, I'm happy to follow up more too if we want to, because I think this is an important question. So if folks want to talk about this for a little bit, I'm happy to.
Thank you for explaining that. I sort of had a similar question that was just answered by what you said, and that some of the leadership, I think, in my organization I'm not sure that they even understand what a content strategy is or what what this can do for them, what this can do for all of us. And so if they don't know what's possible, then it's hard to sell them on a content or talk to them about a content strategy because they don't even know what it is.
Yeah. So if I'm putting together a deck and I'm talking to someone about it. What I'm going to do is, let's go with, where's the original quad? So, you know, this is the abstract stuff. This is what's helping us think about it. But then what I might do is follow this up immediately with questions like, okay, so my workflow questions are, who gets to decide when copy is final and we can hit publish? We don't have a good answer to that as an organization. Wouldn't it feel great to have an answer to that question so that we don't have to talk about how it's going to happen every time, but we can just do it? Other workflow things. So like, what order should we ask stakeholders to review content to avoid having, I wouldn't phrase it like this for certain stakeholders, right? But so this is one that comes up a lot. So like, I just was doing this last week. I put a plan together of like, okay, I think maybe if we ask people in this order to review the content, it's not all going to get thrown out the window, right? Because I feel like if Bob sees it before Jane and Jane sees it before Timothy, then maybe, you know, Jane's going to be like, well, Bob already saw it, so I don't want to mess around with this too much. So there's those kinds of things. You know, governance could be who is the decider in fights about homepage real estate. That's a big one in a lot of organizations. What's crazy is that a lot of times we sort of know the answers to all of these questions, but we haven't written them down. Or what I will find is like a lot of times it's the answer is like a person. Like, you know, I've done a lot of stakeholder interviews where it's like, well, how do we figure out this? Oh, well, we asked Sam about that. Okay, well, how do we decide this? Well, we asked Sam about that. Well, who decides to take this down? We asked Sam about, you know, and it's like, what do you guys do if Sam needs to go on vacation? Like your entire content operation is going to grind to a halt. So, you know, getting these questions out there, you can find the question that the tricky, resistant, difficult, disinterested stakeholders in your life cares about. If you can get that question onto the board and into your pitch and tell them that going through this process is going to get us an answer to the question, they're going to sign off on it. What is interesting too, I have somewhere in here, I talk about how, yeah, we have some stuff around alignment. Alignment doesn't mean agreement. A lot of times people are happy to have answers, even if it's not the answer they would have picked, right? So who decides when copy is final and who gets to decide? Okay, we decide that Sam's the decider on when we hit publish. But Natalie wanted, you're just the people on my screen, I apologize. So Natalie decides, like really wanted it to be her. In my experience, that like the disappointment that the answer is Sam will fade because God, it feels good to have an answer and know. And like Natalie can learn how Sam works and figure out how to work Sam to get what she wants published on the website. Having those answers, having this stuff documented, that's what makes you valuable as a content strategist. It makes people hungry for more of this work. Asking and answering these questions, that's doing the work. Gets people super excited. I do this in presentations. That's how I scope engagements, actually, is like I'll use a framework like the quad, list out questions. Like you came to us with all of these questions about content strategy. After some consultations with your leadership, we've decided that these are the 5 most important questions. Our engagement is going to answer it. We're going to answer this question by interviewing your leadership. We're going to answer this question by having an editorial planning workshop. We're going to answer this question by surveying, doing an interrupt survey of 10,000 visitors and then running a card sort. Whatever it is, but it's articulating the question that you're actually trying to answer. The wrong thing to do, and I see people, I've done this. The wrong thing to do is to get this book and then try and do all of it because you think content strategy is a good idea. And so you start, and it's like, okay, what's chapter 1? All right, well, chapter 2, they're starting to talk about audits, so I guess we need to do a content audit. And if you don't know why you're doing a content audit, you are wasting time. I've done it. It sucks. You get to the end of it, it was so much work, and then it's like, what are we going to do with this audit? It's like, I don't know. It just felt like we should do one because that's what content strategists do, and I'm not really sure.
Scott, do you mind doing the questions the same scenario that you've done with workflow and governance for substance and structure?
Yeah. So let's put a few more examples up here. And I know there's lots of slides we haven't gotten to yet. I promise you that this is better stuff than what was on those slides. So you all are asking great questions. So substance. What topics are most appropriate for our website versus our social channels? Substance could be, oops, and my camera died, which is not that important, but let's see. Oh, it defaulted to the FaceTime cam. Great. Okay. So substance might be, are we going to include any first-person narratives from our leadership team in our mix of content, right? Substance could even be format questions like, should we do video? It's not a good question. It's a question that a lot of people have. A better question is like, how can video help us support our business goals? But that's the kind of stuff that's out there. Structure, the classic ones. How do we best organize content for browsing or searching? Structure could be, what is our user's mental model of this problem space? And how can we reflect that with how our content is organized? So, these are kind of low-hanging fruit, top of mind for me. When you get into the specifics of a given organization, there might be, sometimes there's stuff that like, I have this with like associations a lot where people are sort of like, I'm so sorry. I know this seems like so much smaller than everything else, but it is killing our team. Like, should we call them agents or associates? We desperately need someone else to decide for us because we're sick of arguing about it, right? You could say that that's like a substance kind of question. And the nice thing about content strategy too is that this is not a one and done thing, right? We talked about how it's never done. So you get answers to some of these, then you're going to come up with more questions, and you'll keep asking them and keep answering them. Love it. Excellent, excellent questions. Other stuff we want to dig into here, other examples that would be helpful. All right. We have been back for 55 minutes, I realized. Let's take a short break. I'm going to get some of the next slides queued up. We will take 4 minutes. So again, at the top of the half-hour mark, we will get back to it. So I'll see you all again shortly. Okay, I'm going to start things up again here. Make sure we can make the most of this last 30 minutes. So I want to close out that one quickly by talking about a few specific techniques around getting started in building alignment. And I guess I should switch to sharing my screen. Just this one. So very classic thing to put to work. Matrix is just a fancy word for table. Making a table, making a list of the stakeholders. This is something that I'll do a lot at the beginning of an engagement. If I'm in-house, right, it can be a little overkill to do this for a smaller initiative. It's good to at least do on the back of a napkin, so to speak, of like thinking through who cares the most about this stuff. And some things that you can identify is like what kind of role specifically for this project. And the project might be get our editorial calendar done. Project might be a big thing like establish our enterprise-wide content strategy. Hopefully you've broken it down into smaller chunks than that. You're going to think about like what role do they play? Are they a champion for the project and they're going to help you convert people internally to being on your side? Are they just a point of contact point for you? Do they actually have responsibility for delivering something? So on and so forth. And then developing some types or ways to identify them. I don't recommend any specific categories. I do think it's nice to at least you can think of these maybe more as tags than types. Who's making decisions? Who are you using as a subject matter expert? So they know a lot about the thing. Who might you be using as a user proxy, which is like a lot of times support and customer service people, sales agents who might like know a lot about the customer, and one conversation with them doesn't substitute for user interviews, but it can give you a lot of direction. And you might be thinking about implementers. Like if we're going to make this strategy, build this out, do this new way of content planning, whatever it might be, who's going to carry out the work? That's a place I've fallen short a few times as a consultant because it's harder, but I'm trying to get better at it, of really like not just giving people a pile of documents and saying good luck, but thinking about how are you really going to carry this out in your organization. Your actual stakeholder matrix would hopefully be a little more detailed than this. I've given them to clients before and they've spent a month, like even just this was a light bulb moment for them of like, oh yeah, let's think through all the people who care about content in our organization, make a list of them, write down what some of their concerns are or what we think their concerns might be, to give a start on planning a project. So stakeholder matrix can just help you capture notes about how you want to approach it. Doing the matrix work, you can also do this for users too. Sometimes I have users on the list. I did it, one of my last big consulting projects was for a scientific publishing organization. So some of the people on the stakeholder list were, they were sort of like stakeholders, but also customers. They made use of the publishing service. So they were important enough to the business that we really put some thought about how to talk to them. And importantly, as you look down a list like this, from a soft skills, people management perspective, someone had asked about kind of, leading people and stakeholders. You can look at a list like this rhetorically, right? Is like, well, who signed off on these recommendations? Well, we interviewed so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And what they had to say are part of our recommendation. It's like, you talked to so-and-so about it. That's one of our key customers. They are, and they like the idea. Here's a quote from them. They're sold. You should be sold too. Hooray. So keeping track of that, not just having all of these conversations happen on the phone in the ether, can be really important. Interviewing stakeholders. Here's how you interview stakeholders. Make a short list of questions you want to ask. Get a friend to help you take notes. Shut up and listen. Ask people, who are your users? What web content is important to you? What problems do you have with the website? They will talk for an hour. You don't need a fancy process for it. You just need to talk to them. So don't get hung up on interview planning. Alignment workshops. This is a practical way of like getting alignment. And alignment is not the same as agreement, but as I'm quoting myself here, sometimes alignment just means getting everyone to air out their content feelings in a room and align on what our questions are, for instance. This is a link to an article that I wrote up on the Brain Traffic blog. You can plan a workshop, a 90-minute meeting, a half day. You could get people sequestered for 2 days. in a conference room somewhere when the pandemic is over if you want. And you just make a plan to have conversations around these things and make some preliminary decisions. You could be aligning on who our priority audiences are for the website. What's the vision behind this content channel that we're propping up? Maybe we just want to get aligned on what all the problems are. Maybe we want to talk about what the shape of our content team could be. The idea is just that sometimes what you have to do is carve out time to have these conversations on purpose. They happen all the time accidentally because everything else is difficult when we haven't aligned on our content strategy. Something you can do as a content strategist is help the team have these conversations purposefully. If you have experience in general as a facilitator doing design facilitation, you can bring all those skills to bear. If you've ever just gotten a group of children to agree which movie they want to go see, you have the requisite skills to wrangle, herd those cats and do a bit of stakeholder alignment. It is a lot of just getting people to talk, listening, making notes, asking them, is this what you mean? Can we all agree on cheese? Whatever it might be. I can talk specific planning if people want to get into the weeds on stakeholder alignment workshops a little bit later, but I just want, we have a tool section next week, but I just wanted to kind of drop this idea in here because after we talk about all this, you might be thinking, well, how do I actually do it? Like, what is it that I do? You put a meeting on the calendar and you take a run at it. That's how you do it. There's no other magic formula. You got to get people in a room, you put an agenda item together, you start talking, hopefully you come out of there with some decisions. Take more notes than everyone else and send a follow-up right away. And you're starting to do content strategy. Okay, questions on these things, stakeholders, hot, urgent, burning questions around this before we move on to talking user-centered content for a little bit. Great, love it, you're all experts now, yay. Okay. So in the syllabus, I had carved out this strategy exercise. I actually want to do this as homework now. So we will return to this. We already got a good start at it earlier with these questions over here. So I want to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is user-centered content. I said I wasn't going to get into writing. I'm not getting into writing, but this is getting us closer. This is thinking about how do we actually plan and produce content that people are going to be able to use, that they're going to care about? What does it mean to bring a user-centered design or design thinking lens to content, which not a lot of organizations do? It's a competitive advantage, I would argue. To me, being user-centered with content means that we have some focus and consistency when we create content. I don't have much focus or consistency when it comes to making dinner. I'm hungry and I start flinging open cupboards and flipping through takeout menus. And I'm having the same thoughts and conversations and problems over and over again. Why did I not buy more milk when I was at the store? Being user-centered is a way of bringing focus into all of these confusing and disparate content strategy conversations. If we are talking about our editorial calendar, for instance, a question people forget to ask sometimes is, what content do our users want? People have lots of conversations about what do we have to say? What do we want to say in Q3? What do we want to say in 2022? A good question is, what do people want to hear? Voice. You're establishing your voice for your brand, for your new blog. What should we sound like? What's us? What does it really mean to be XYZ Corporation? A good question to ask during those conversations is, what voice do our users associate with us? What voice rings true? What kind of person do people think of when they think of our company? Content modeling. So a content model, we could talk about a little bit more next week. that is it's a pattern for producing similar types of content. So it's like the way your content is structured. The classic example of a content model is a recipe, which is in the modern web. The content model for a recipe is a 2,000 word personal essay, then an ingredients list, and then instructions, right? Steps. So 1, 2, 3, those are the elements of your content model. If you're being user-centered, one might ask, what if the ingredients were at the top of the recipe ahead of the personal essay so that people could know whether or not they're going to be able to make this for dinner tonight? Y'all get the idea. I think that being a user-centered content strategist is a really useful lens to adopt because it gets you unstuck every time. What should we do about this? Should we publish this? Should we remove this? You know, almost any one of these questions we can bring back to what is best for our users. I like this quote a lot from Dana Chisnell, especially if you are in civics or government and all. She is a great person to follow. It talks about how if we want products and designs that our users fall in love with, we need to fall in love with our users. I don't think she means it romantically. That would be weird. Depends on your industry. But I do think of, love as like, if you love something, you're thinking about it all the time, right? The loved ones in your life, animals that you love, your favorite foods. I don't have to, no one needs to remind me that I like pizza and ice cream. I'm going to remember because I love pizza and ice cream. I'm thinking about them right now. So some questions you can start to ask yourself in your organization to get you closer to being user-centered as a content strategist is, oops, switching modes here. Who are our real users? And sometimes you're defining that at the channel level, right? Who's using our website? As a content person, who are your real users is a secretly powerful question because the customers for your organization, audience for your organization, constituency for your whatever, are not always the same as the people using your website. I'll give you an example from higher ed. I worked on a student affairs website, very classic information about what vaccine records you need to have on file, how to get mental health counseling, what time the rec center is open, which bands are playing in the quad this month, all that kind of classic stuff. So all they talked about are students, right? Students, we're student affairs. Well, we did some research. Folks in the room, you might have a guess. Do you know who the real consumers of that content were? Any guesses? Kristen gets the gold star. It's parents. No student looked at any of that shit. None of them. It was parents, and then Andre's right as well, staff and faculty. So if there is a student experiencing some sort of emotional distress, they would not go on the student affairs website. They would talk to a trusted advisor or maybe an RA, and then that person would use the student affairs content to provide them resources. Interestingly, at the conclusion of that process, we still decided that writing to students, making students the you in our editorial voice was still the right choice, but it informed our content planning quite a bit. We thought differently about what are the questions that parents and faculty and staff have, and how do we kind of make the action steps more focused on their real situation. So becoming more user-centered. Talk about who your real users are. What is it that you know about these users? Making lists of that. I'll talk about how in a moment. And then the one that's missing a lot is how are we documenting and socializing that knowledge? A lot of organizations operate on the model of just sort of assuming knowledge about users, and everyone thinks that everyone understands them the same way, and they don't, because that's not how people work. So it's really important to document this stuff. Another framework, We're in a fundamentals class. There's a lot of frameworks, I'm sorry. Esoteric stuff. Hopefully it's helpful. If you are getting started in your organization, trying to have conversations around who our users are, I like this framework for talking about their attributes. So users are made of their identity, who they are. Behavior is what they do. Mindset is how they think. Thoughts, feelings, emotions. And then a really important one is user needs. What do people actually need? We talk so much as organizations about what we want to have happen on the website, and just, you know, content strategy, user experience design, whatever it might be. We just don't talk enough about what our users actually need. This is a question I get in every engagement that I think might illustrate things. Scott, how do we balance user needs and business needs with our content? What do we do? Because the users want one thing and the business wants something else. That's precisely what your content should be about. If there is something that is only a business need, it should probably not be part of your content footprint. That's an internal process. That is something to figure out. Keep, like those company picnic, I don't know why I'm harping on that. It was just bonkers. It's a financial investment firm. They're managing hundreds of millions of dollars for people, and they have these old picnic photos on their website. That's a business need because somebody might want those photos. It's not a user need. Get it off the website. Easy. A lot of user needs are not things that your business wants to support. You can't be everything to everyone. Where these two things overlap, this is the focal point of your content strategy. Another question I get all the time is balancing competing audience needs, right? We've only got one homepage, and we've got members and prospective members and clients and agents and journalists. All of these people are interested in our content. Whom should we talk to on our homepage? What happens a lot in content strategy planning is that these sort of demographic descriptions, right, of like member versus customer, agent versus associate, whatever it might be, those are ways of understanding them as a business, but they're not a very useful way of understanding them as a content strategist. And a lot of the work that I do is I go in, start talking about user needs, and I'll actually very often articulate it as, so here we have prospective, let's say it's an association. So this is one category is prospective members. Let's say another category is professionals in the field. And another category is, for whatever reason, let's say it's journalists, okay, who write about your industry. That feels like three different groups. You could put those three groups together. Let's even say team managers in our, no, okay, managers in our industry. These three groups might all be people who need information about our membership offerings. So that could be what's there in the middle, is that there's a common need, and there's probably a better example I can come up with for this, but it's been a long session. The people who need membership in offering information could come from all three of those audiences. So now what you're deciding as an organization is, how important is this group of people who need information about our membership offerings overall to our business strategy? Is that the most important thing we're doing? Is that what we want to be talking about on our homepage, is our membership offerings? What it could be, so I'm thinking of this association I worked with, you know, people who are interested in physics are not there customers. This is a sciences organization, but it's a much larger group, and it's really like that's at the core of their organization, as people who are interested in physics. And the strategy we ended up setting for them to a certain extent was to become leaders online in physics, which is a huge discipline, right? And they had an opportunity to be the most trusted source for physics related questions on the web. That's powerful. That's a powerful position to be in. And you don't get there by making a homepage that has, you know, segmented navigation for current members, prospective members, journalists, teachers, so on and so forth. No, you focus in on that common audience need. All right, questions. Do you typically identify the users yourself as a content strategist? No, definitely a team activity. So this some of what you all practiced earlier with card sorting, you'll do 101 card sorts as a content strategist on all different topics. I ask people to just describe who are some of the people who use our website. It comes up in stakeholder interviews a lot. I just ask people that. I don't say, are members an important audience to you? I ask them to describe who are some of the people that are important to you? Like, who are you responsible to? Who are you trying to support? I capture all of those words. I find often people from different departments mean the same group of people, but they're using different words to describe them. You do some sorting, organizing, you frame it with this people who language, you pitch it back to them and say, could we all agree that this is our key audience? So definitely a team activity when you can do it. There's research that you can do on your own, but you want to align as a group. So great question, Brennan, thank you. Is there a personas tool or template you would recommend for developing the user's profile? I do not recommend a specific persona template. I like minimal personas. I do have a tool I like quite a bit, which I'm going to talk about now, that I think can even be more important for content people, which is empathy mapping. If folks are not familiar, well, first we'll cover personas. I'm sure many of you have encountered personas already. The idea there is that at their best, a persona is a synthesis of research about a group of users. It's produced by a user experience research team who knows what they're doing, and they create a composite portrait of a person. So at a company I work with, we have Ethans and Danielles. That's like internal baseball. And when someone says Ethan, I know exactly who they mean. We have a shared understanding of who Ethan is because we can pull up a document that describes what matters to Ethan, what kind of skill level they have, their comfort with marketing technology, all that sort of stuff. It's not a real person, but it reflects a real person. Now, where a lot of organizations fall short is that they only make these personas, but they make the personas, they talk about the personas, but they don't put them in context. A persona is an idea of a person, and what you're designing generally is some sort of situation. What happens to Ethan when his credit card gets declined? What happens to Ethan if there's, you know, I don't know, civil unrest and they're not able to communicate with their home office for a while, whatever it might be. I'm mixing clients now. But the idea being that you need to put them into a situation. And the tool I like for that, this was developed by a guy named Dave Gray for his consultancy, Xplane, is empathy mapping. And I actually have a larger, I thought we might have time to practice today, but I don't think we will. But there's a template down here that you can borrow and steal. And the idea is we take someone, our persona, we put them in a scenario. So just that simple thing of like, they're a monthly recurring customer and their credit card got declined. We weren't able to bill them. Let's think about that situation. What is that person thinking and feeling? They might be worried that their credit card has been stolen, right? Depending on, like, that could be their first thought. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. They might be wondering, will my files still be there if I can't resolve payment right away? What do they say and do? They might go to your website and they type credit card issues into search. What have they heard? They have heard from a friend that it's a nightmare to deal with this company's support agents. And so they're feeling super anxious and stressed out about having to deal with this. I know these are a little small, I apologize. The idea there of an empathy map is that it's something that extends a persona. You can sketch out both of these quickly. You can sketch out a persona really quick. What are some attributes of this person that we think we're designing for? And what's the situation that this person is in? You can do this in a 50-minute meeting and come away with more clarity about who you're writing for, who you're doing editorial planning for, any of that stuff than you've ever had as an organization. It's there are more robust and therefore more rewarding ways of approaching this work. But you can do it really fast and dirty. It's not, it's accessible, I guess is the point I would like to make there. The flip side of that, and I guess in terms of effort, is another tool I wanted to just introduce. If people want to learn more about this in depth, we can queue it up for the tool session next week, is top task analysis. Top task analysis, there's a guy named Jerry McGovern who developed this with his consultancy. Really robust process, a lot of surveying, a lot of ranking. It's very hands-on. But the idea here is that you have prioritized some audiences, you understand them. So let's say for that association, our primary audience are industry professionals. We have some secondary audiences with current members and so on. We've gone tip to toe across the organization and listed out all of the stuff that someone could do, right? And you pull that from search results, you pull that from just the content you have, all the CTAs. What can people do with your organization? They could call support, they could buy something, they could have to change their address, they could look up the hours that your business is open, they could find the contact information for someone that they know, they could find it for someone that they don't know, right? This could be 1,000 items long. What they found over and over again, and I've run these projects, is that if anyone's familiar with the idea of the long tail, there's going to be a handful of tasks that are important to most users of a digital thing. And that's what you can architect your experience around. And then there's going to be this long tail of stuff that's not that important to most people, but maybe still important to them sometimes. And you need to have paths to it. But top task analysis is a method that you can do to articulate that in depth. Okay. We're going to get into, there's a tool section next week. We're going to get into these a little bit more. I want to talk about the homework exercise, and I want to look at the chat for questions really quick as we come up on the last few minutes here. Do you find the companies already have personas in place, but they're just not using them? Yeah, I did an extended, I really wanted to be a comedian probably, right? So I did an extended bit once at a conference about like, you ask a company for their personas and like they go pull the candlestick on the wall and you have to like follow a wizard down these musty steps and you're knocking cobwebs out of the way and they get this old leather bound book that has the personas in them. It's usually the same book that has the voice and tone work the branding agency did 10 years ago. So they have them and aren't using them. Yes, very often the case. That's value that a content strategist can bring, is that we can put the work that's been done to use. If you can make people feel like the stuff they already spent money on wasn't a waste, you will be a hero. They will love you, love you, love you. You can honestly save someone's job because it's great. Whatever it was, the voice and tone work, the personas, the top task analysis, anything that got carried a certain way, and then the company's not really making use of it. If you can help them bring it to life with content strategy, you're in the money, friend. Do content strategists, Brenda asks, do content strategists create personas, or is this also a team activity, UXR? Yeah, so I mentioned UX research. You might ask, I might answer this after you asked it. I would not recommend, personas especially, I would never recommend drafting on your own. The whole point of it is to create shared understanding. So the more of the stuff that you can do as a team, the better. Sometimes if people are stuck and can't agree on something and it's really pulling teeth, I will pitch something and then we workshop it together. So if I make a persona, the reason I'm making the persona is to get people to tell me why it's wrong in a meeting so that we can get to what's right. But I almost never make stuff and just give it to people and say, here is the answer. And that's for strategy statements, personas, audience prioritization, anything, all collaborative. Okay, you all have been troopers. Appreciate you hanging with me for these 3 hours. You can see it here, CS questions. What I want everyone to do as homework, I'll also, I'll send an email out and put something in the shared drive. But what I want people to do is to bring this back to your world. If you're not on a team right now and the world is you and your resume and portfolio, that is big enough. What I want you to do is take a content strategy framework. You can use the old or the new quad. You could use my VMT framework. You could find yourself interested in this and go Google and pick a new one. I want you to make a list of questions that content strategy could help answer for your organization. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to be able to tell me how you'll get to the answer. That's what I want to do for you next week. I want you to just think through for your organization, based on your understanding right now on Thursday, February 18th, 2021, what can content strategy answer for your organization? Think about the stakeholders that are important to you, the people that you work with, the team next door, the folks downstream from your work, if that's developers or designers, technical writers, whomever it might be. What does it feel like you're spending a lot of time talking about where it'd be nice to have some answers? If you have 2 hours to work on this, you could probably spend 2 hours on it. I wouldn't spend any less than 20 minutes on it. So we'll say 20 minutes to 2 hours. Really up to you. If you fire off 100 of them in 10 minutes, call it a day. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Where
Can
to?
Sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
Can I be really horrible and ask you to say that all again, like maybe more bullet pointy as I'm writing it down to not forget any of it? Sorry.
Yes. So bullet point 1, I will
Yes.
make bullet points and email this to everyone. Bullet point 2, you are going to spend 20 minutes or more creating a list of questions that content strategy can help your organization answer. So looking at this as kind of your jumping off point. List. Small questions are okay. Small questions are great, actually, because sometimes a whole bunch of those small questions come together. But this is effectively all that I want you to do. Pick a framework. This quad works great. Just to inspire questions, make a big list of questions that content strategy could help your organization with. You don't have to have the answers. We can talk about that next week. Anything I can help with right now to make people feel settled before we break for the day, coming into next week, things we're worried about for next week. Oh my gosh, we didn't talk about this. Is he going to cover that? I need him to cover that. If he doesn't cover it, I won't be able to do it. And then I'm going to get fired. That's how I feel coming out of these things sometimes. Cool. I am available to you. Email is great over this week. You'll all be hearing from me specifically with a few more notes on the homework assignment. I'll put some examples in there for you. Really quick to preview for next week, just as a reminder, and if folks need to drop off, that's just fine. What I am intending to focus on is, this is the CS toolbox. There's a lot of just practical stuff. Content inventories, content audits, messaging frameworks, things that we just like are kind of technical and detailed and aren't in my opinion, the right starting point that I would at least like to introduce you to next week. So we're going to talk about some of those tactical tools. We're going to get into, for the voice and branding minded folks, we're going to get into messaging frameworks, voice and storylines, just like what if we had a voice as an organization, what is it like to apply it? That's really the missing step a lot. Like, okay, we have a voice now, I guess. What do we do with it? I don't I don't know if technical team is the heading I would give here, but I do definitely want to talk about growing a practice and partnering with lots of different types of people. The bullets here, designers, product managers, developers. If you have questions about working with other types of people, put it on the board. I'll be happy to put some material together. And then we'll kind of get into the job market a little bit and how you might sell your, like, fast forward 6 months, you're all experts at this stuff. How might you sell that portfolio, all that good stuff. So questions come up, email me or put them on the board. You'll get an email from me about the homework assignment. I think that's it. You all have been fantastic.
Thank you, Scott.
Stay warm. Stay alive. It's kind of freaky out there. I'm in Minneapolis, as I mentioned. It was like 20, 30 below. I stopped looking at the temperature. It's very scary. It's warming up a little bit for us now. So, all right. Godspeed and good luck, everyone. We'll catch up next week.
Thank you so much. See you next week.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Hey.